It's nice to see you again. Okay, we're starting again with questions. So our writer writes as follows. I'm new to practicing Judaism, and I'm confused about tzniut and dress. Is tzniut and dress an actual law, or is it something that everybody chooses to do on the basis of their own definitions, or according to the type of family or community or form of Judaism that they're liege to? No matter what my rabbi says, I never seem to see all religious Jewish women dressed the same. The laws seem pretty straightforward according to what I've been told. Is this different in this that they do whatever they want over the law? Or is there actually room for individual observance? There are communities in which the religious women do not cover elbows or knees, but will wear shorts and pants, although nothing too revealing. And in other communities, they wear what everybody else does. And these women are religious and are accepted as such. And I've lived in places where all these types of dresses are seen. I'm even more confused about tzniut and conduct, and I'm specifically concerned about conduct outside the home. I'm confused because of the part of the Torah that praises statements about Sarah. Does it mean that all Jewish women should be at home? Is it better for a man to choose to work and to go to the store and to take the kids out? Now, the person who wrote this question may notice that I rephrased it a little bit, and there's a reason. It's because some of it's cut off. It wasn't censorship. Okay, so what you see is very descriptive of the tznius scene. There are laws, and some people keep them with more sincerity and with more carefulness, and other people less so. So the real question is, why is it that people who will be very careful about kashrut aren't as careful about tzniut? And people who are very careful about Shabbos, about which bracha to say, aren't as careful about tzniut. And this is the objective truth. But I'm going to expand the question. There are people who are very careful about Shabbos and very careful about kashrut and brachot, whose interpersonal behavior isn't perfect. So what we're going to have to talk about now is two things. The more general reality that some mitzvot seem to have better luck than others, and the specific reality having to do with tzniut. The reality is that there are some mitzvot that people will find easier to observe than others, and there's a reason for it. They're in less conflict with both the inner climate and the outer climate. So let's take Shabbos. The fact is that there were times when keeping Shabbos was extremely difficult. If you would go back to America in the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the choice to keep Shabbos was an extraordinary choice. It was almost impossible to find a job in which a person worked for someone else in which they could keep Shabbos. So the people who were willing to say, I have to do what I have to do, ultimately ended up working for themselves. And not everyone is good at that. Not everyone has startup capital. Not everyone has business acumen. It's not so simple. Even as late as the 60s, it wasn't easy. It was only later when the legal system made it possible for people to demand to keep Shabbos as a right that the work issue became less significant. But even then, even in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, if a person did keep Shabbos, he usually kept Shabbos. Meaning, if he made the big step, which was not to go to work, then usually everything else fell into place. He would keep all of the other melachot. When you compare this to tzniut, or the mitzvot ben adam lechavero, you don't see the same picture. And I'll tell you why. When it comes to keeping Shabbos, the enemy is usually on the outside. The employer, the physical necessities of life. So for instance, there are difficulties in keeping Shabbos. Makeup, travel, electricity. But these all live outside your inner self. You aren't your electric light. You aren't your makeup. You have a self. And yourself isn't touched by these things if you're committed to Shabbos. Then yourself wants a day in which you could observe your relationship to Hashem as the Creator in a way that's whole and real. The same would hold true with kashrut. You aren't the meat. Now, kashrut isn't easy. I don't want to pretend it's easy. Kosher food is much more expensive and much harder to access than other food. But nonetheless, what's on the line is the food, not oneself. You aren't the chicken. You eat the chicken. And by and large, nowadays, when people fall in their observance of kashrut, the reason isn't about kashrut, it's about interpersonal relationships. For instance, there are people who, upon their return to the United States after having studied in Israel, will find that kashrut at home is very difficult, but it's difficult emotionally. The emotional issues end up being oftentimes what causes failure rather than the actual issues. Unlike that, tzniut is about the self. The mitzvot between man and man are about the self. Let's look at the mitzvot between man and man first, just as an illustration, then we'll go to our main point, which is tzniut. The Torah says, don't speak lashon hara, which means don't say things that are factual and negative about any person or damaging, unless there's a real need, meaning somebody will be saved through this conversation in some way. But the inner self says, I want to communicate how I feel. So the obstacle isn't the outside, the obstacle is the inside. And doing battle with the self is not so easy. The Torah says, don't take revenge. But if somebody hurt me, I feel injured, I feel small, I feel a need to reestablish equality through bringing them down to where I am. It's about me. Now we could talk about tzniut. The way a person dresses is their message about who they are. They tell the world who they are through their dress. And I'll illustrate this with a somewhat extreme and distant illustration and a more current illustration that's much more relevant to your question. The Nazis were fully aware of this. The first thing that people experienced when they went to the camps was they had to give up everything that gave them a personal identity. Not just their clothes, their hair, anything that made them look different. Even their names, they were given numbers. So this was all to take away the most treasured aspect of being, the self. The Nazis were very, very bright, if nothing else. Now I'm going to give you another